Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for coming to my talk. We will be talking about, as the title implies, we'll be talking about Talmudic gems for Rails developers, practical advice and applications from the wisdom of the Talmud that we can take for our lives as software developers and Rails developers. So, in 1977, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of the foremost Hasidic masters of the 20th century, suffered a heart attack on the night of the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah. His followers were devastated, and they all gathered to pray for him. The next night, with hundreds of his followers in the synagogue praying for his recovery, the Rebbe wanted to address his followers, but obviously the doctors wouldn't allow that. And instead, his followers arranged for an intercom to be set up from his room on the second floor to the synagogue in the basement. Being resourceful, they hooked up that intercom to a bunch of phone lines, which were able to connect to many different locations around the world, where his followers were able to listen in, from Los Angeles to Chicago to Paris and Jerusalem, all the way to Melbourne. Quite a technical feat. Remember, this is 1977, before Zoom or even the internet was a household word. And during his talk, the Rebbe noted how what started as an impediment that didn't allow him to come down and address his followers in person actually turned out to be an opportunity to allow more people all around the world to participate and hear the message. Of course, many of us find ourselves in a similar situation. Of course, we would all prefer to be crammed together in a ballroom in a hotel, listening to this talk in person, seeing each other, being able to shake hands, hug, see, touch each other. But we can all, of course, realize the silver lining in the situation, whereas in most years, there are many people who would love to be at a tech conference, but due to family or personal or professional obligations are not able to attend. This year, you're all able to attend wherever you are from the comfort of your own living room and your home. You're all at RailsConf this year. So while I would have loved to start with some kitschy hello Las Vegas or hello San Diego, I will start, like many programmers have throughout the years, with hello world. So a little bit about myself. My name is Yechiel Kalmenson. I'm an engineer at VMware. Though I was not always an engineer, I spent the first few decades of my life studying Talmud, being ordained as a rabbi and serving as a rabbi and a teacher for a few years, eventually making a transition into the world of tech. I learned programming, became a web developer and a software engineer, and now I write code. Though an interesting similarity between rabbis and Talmudic scholars in general and programmers is that what we see as our professional vocation is also taken as a hobby, and we end up doing it also on the nights and weekends. So even while I transitioned to tech and became a programmer, I still obviously kept my Talmud study. I kept up my Talmud study regimens. I still learn till today. And in the course of this journey that I went on, I've noticed a lot of parallels between Talmudic study and programming, and a lot of the lessons that I learned during my years of studying the Talmud were able to transfer really well and help me out in my career and my growth as a developer. And some of these lessons I want to share with you today. So many of us are familiar with the trolley problem, where you have a trolley that's barreling down the tracks. Straight ahead on the track, there are 5 people who, if nothing happens, will be run over. There's an operator standing by a lever who's able to divert the trolley over to another track, but by doing so, he will be killing a person who's lying on that track. So now the trolley operator has a choice to make. Do they let the trolley go straight? Do they do nothing and let 5 people die? Or do they divert it and actively kill a person? And of course, this problem has evolved and grew. There are many different versions of it and many different ways how to arrange the variables, how to make it a little more difficult or easier. But of course, such ethical dilemmas don't only affect Rails operators, they affect Rails developers and, of course, programmers in general. The work we do often has big moral implications, and navigating them can be pretty tricky and pretty tough. Oftentimes, there are no correct answers. Many times, you'll be left with more questions than you started, and that is a lot of what makes Talmud study so engaging and fun, is that also you always end up with more questions than you started. And while I will not be able to offer answers in this talk, I do hope that you will walk away with a new appreciation, a new way to ask these questions, and a new way to think about these questions. So what is the Talmud? What is the Talmud? The Talmud, I'm sure many of you have heard the word Talmud. Some of you might have heard a saying here or there. But in short, the Talmud is the written record of the conversations of the ancient Jewish sages. It serves as the primary repository of the law, legend, and lore of the Jewish people, and it's the essential focus of rabbinical scholarship. What the Talmud is not, it's not a dry textbook. It is a very living document. It is, it doesn't just give you the laws and this is what you got to do. This is this is the answer. It's a record of the actual debates. You can hear that when learning it, when immersing yourself in Talmudic study, you can almost hear the Talmudic sages argue in the background. You can put yourself right in between them into the study hall, into the debates. It's almost like a living, breathing Twitter thread where you can actually be part of the conversation. Jews have been studying the Talmud for over 2,000 years now. And like I said, when I made the transition into tech, I found many, many parallels between Talmudic study and software engineering. For one, both of them deal with abstractions. The Talmud calls it mevin davar mitoch davar, to tease out, to understand one thing from another thing, to tease out an abstraction from a concrete example. When you have a spec and you turn it into a program, or when you have a program that's that has one use case and you try to abstract it out to be applicable in many situations. Similarly, both the Talmud and software engineering, while both of them being highly analytical, have a very strong creative component to them. And also, both the Talmud and software engineering require intense periods of intense concentration and maintaining context over long periods of time. I'm sure we're all familiar with the frustration of being in the zone and then someone just pulling you for a 2-minute question and losing everything. That is a pain that I was familiar with very strongly from my Talmudic life as well. And while the Talmud is an old book, it's been compiled over 2,000 years ago, I hope to present the wisdom that I learned in the words of the Talmud as yayin yashan bekan kan chadash, as old wine in new vessels, where I hope to take the ancient wisdom of the sages and present it in our new modern tools for our modern life. And we will hopefully, throughout this talk, we'll go in 3 parts. We will use the wisdom of the Talmud to teach it, to help us grow ourselves, our team, and to improve the world around us. So let's start with ourselves, of course. Ourselves and our own growth as developers. As developers, we're always learning, we're always growing. The field, of course, is always growing, so we've always got to catch up with it. And the Talmud gives an interesting directive to help us in our growth. The sage Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia said, "Appoint for yourself a mentor and acquire for yourself a companion." Now, there's actually 2 parts to this directive, and we will deal with them one at a time. Starting with the first half, appoint for yourself a mentor. We all know the importance of mentorship. None of us were taught ourselves. I'm a big believer that the self-taught developer is a myth. Of course, we all owe a lot of our knowledge, whether it be through books or through courses or through a mentor or a teacher or a teaching advisor or a college course or a boot camp, whatever it is. We all we all depend on others to get to where we are. And finding a mentor, finding someone that you can build this relationship with, someone who you can ask questions to, someone who can help you out, someone who can provide a sanity check when you need, is very, very, very important. But of course, the question is, how do you find a mentor? It's not always easy. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, both as a mentor and as a mentee, none of those relationships ever started with one person going over to another and saying, hey, can you please be my mentor? I'm sure there have been mentor-mentee relationships that started that way. Just from my experience, most of the relationships I've been in started more organically. Someone I was friends with, or someone I looked up to, or someone I've seen around and interacted with, maybe on Twitter or online or at a meetup. And then one day you say, hey, can you please help me out over here? I have this problem I can't figure out the answer to, or, can you please take a look at this code? Give me some feedback. And the basic idea is, as another Talmudic sage, Hillel, said, one who is timid cannot learn. Lo habaishan lamed. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. If you have someone in your life like that, feel free, please do ask, in fact. I can tell you for myself, when people ask me a question, that's the biggest ego boost I can imagine. The programming community is very welcoming, is very friendly, is very open. We love helping. Just ask. It's the biggest compliment to when you of course it's intimidating to approach someone, especially someone who you might look up to, someone who you might think is like way beyond you. But trust me when I'll tell you that they will be more flattered if you do ask. And of course, the flip side, Hillel continued, he says, nor can an impatient person teach. Lo hakaptan melamed. If someone does approach you and ask you for help, even if you don't have the time at the moment to help, please answer with empathy, with patience, explain why now might not be a good time, point them in the right direction where they could find someone to help them. Of course, if you could help, definitely please do help. We'll get more into that later. But of course, the relationship between a mentor and a mentee is probably one of the strongest impetuses, the strongest drives towards your self-growth as a developer. But of course, then comes the second part of that directive, and acquire for yourself a companion. A mentor is someone who is above you, someone who you can ask questions to, someone who knows more than you, is more knowledgeable than you. But even if the people around you are at the same level as you, surround yourself with other people who are like you. Surround yourself with peers. People are the same as you. And of course, try to get together for peer programming, for meetups, whatever it is. I'm currently at VMware, but I was originally hired at Pivotal. And if anyone knows anything, those of you who know Pivotal know that peer programming is a very big part of our culture. And pair programming was something that was very new to many of my colleagues, but not to me. In yeshiva, the Talmudic school where I was learning, our primary mode of learning was not through classes or through lectures by teachers. It was in a system called the chavruta. The chavruta is the way Jews have been studying in yeshiva for centuries, if not millennia. It's where two peers sit together with the books and work their way together without a teacher, just themselves. They run into a problem, you can bash your heads against each other together, work your way through the problems together, bounce ideas off each other, rubber duck with each other. And when I came to Pivotal, where we were peer programming all the time, I found that same dynamic in peer programming. When you're peer programming, aside from being a great way to write code and free, you catch typos so much more quickly with extra 2 pairs of eyes. But aside from that, just the fact of two very different people sitting together working on the same code, you're bound to help each other grow. You're bound to learn from each other and to teach each other. I've never had a pair that I did not both teach and learn from. So, if you can pair as part of onboarding to your team, that's of course the best way to grow new members on your team. having a companion, having a pair is probably the fastest driver towards self-growth as a programmer. And as the Talmudic sage Rabbi Chama bar Chanina said, this was in the context where the sages compared the Torah to iron. And they said, why is the Torah compared to iron? It said, just as two iron blades, when you rub two iron blades against each other, they will sharpen each other. Each one will sharpen the other. So too, when two Torah scholars study together, they sharpen one another. And of course, in the same way, when you peer program with someone else, when you get together with a peer with someone who's on your level, you're bound to sharpen, to make each other better, to help each other grow a lot faster than each of you would be growing on your own. And another directive that can help us in our journey, in our growth as developers, going back to the sage Hillel that we mentioned before, Hillel said, do not separate yourself from the community. Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Being part of a community is so important. And of course, nowadays, there are tech communities and programming communities all over. No matter where you live in the world, chances are there is a community of programmers in the area, or probably more than one. Of course, all of nowadays, even if you can't find something local, and of course, right now local isn't much of a thing anymore, for now. But online, there are tons of communities on Twitter. You can find Slack groups, Discord channels. All of you are participating in a community right now just by virtue of being at this conference, and hopefully next year we will be back at real world conferences and with actual physical community. But being part of a community, aside for being a great way to find mentors and peers, like we mentioned before, it's just having a sense of belonging and a sense of community, and seeing that there are so many other people who are going through the same thing as you and learning the same thing as you, and happy to share their resources and happy to take your resources. All of that can boost your growth so much better. And finally, another tool in our self-growth as developers is consistency. Many of you may be familiar with the 100 Days of Code Challenge, where you challenge yourself to code a little bit every single day for 100 days. And as a disclaimer, I do not condone all of you having a GitHub chart like that. In fact, I definitely don't. And, I wouldn't even say that's a goal of mine. In fact, for a while, I went on a small crusade to rename the 100 Days of Code to 86 Days of Code, which is similar to 100 Days of Code, just you take one day a week as a mental health break so you don't burn out. Didn't catch on, but you can still find the blog post at that URL over there. But the point of challenges like the 100 Days of Code or 86 Days of Code is to build consistency, to build habits. And the number 100 is significant. As Hillel told Bar Heihei, that one who reviews their studies 100 times is not comparable to one who reviews their studies 101 times. And now that might sound a little extreme. I don't think any of us has ever reviewed something 100 times. But keep in mind that this was about 2,000 years ago, before the invention of the printing press, and writing books by hand was extremely time intensive and resource intensive. And the primary mode of transferring knowledge from teacher to student was orally. And the primary mode of students retaining that knowledge was through repetition. And students would often repeat. The teacher would give a lesson, and then the students would go on their own and repeat it over and over and over to commit it to memory. And apparently the norm was to repeat every lesson 100 times. And what Hillel was saying was that the point is not the 100 times. The point is what happens at the 101st time. When I did the 100 Days of Code Challenge, where I really noticed the growth was not on the 100th day. It was on the 101st day when I just sat down and coding was natural. I didn't have to force myself. I didn't have to consciously, okay, I have this challenge. It just happened. Because by doing something over and over and over every single day, or not every day, if you take a break, but the point is the consistency, say 3 times a week, or, every weekday, or every Sunday night, or whatever it is. By building that consistency, you build habits, you make it part of you, and that's where true growth happens. So much for growing ourselves. But of course, none of us is an island. and we're all part of teams, and different teams have different dynamics. And every team is different, of course, depending on the size, depending on who's on the team, depending on the individuals. But every team will have, there'll be more senior members and more junior members, and it'll be sort of implied that the seniors will help out the juniors, help mentor them, help grow them, help provide pointers. And we've spoken about mentorship previously, more from the point of view of the mentee, and how important it is to them. And I don't think too many people need convincing of why it's important to be to accept mentorship. But let's look at it from the mentor's perspective now. Why should I mentor? Mentoring obviously takes time, takes resources, takes energy, time that I could be devoting, doing stuff that I want to do, or I can, as a 10x engineer, I can probably, I can whip up a whole app in an afternoon. Why should I spend that time helping someone else writing just, fixing one small bug? And of course, many people will give you many different answers of why it's important to mentor, the importance of paying it forward, remember where you were, mentoring a junior will make them a senior. Bringing them up to speed will lighten your workload in the future. It's an investment or whatever. But the sages of the Talmud recognized that that in a mentor-mentee relationship, the main beneficiary is not always the mentee. Sometimes it is the mentor. Rabbi Hanina said, I have learned much from my teachers and even more from my colleagues, but from my students, I have learned more than all of them. When you help someone, when you're teaching someone, when you're teaching a junior, someone who doesn't share the context, the knowledge that you have, many, many times you will find that you've gained a whole new perspective. Many times you'll find that, just by taking a complex topic and trying to break it down into simpler components, or just by trying to explain an idea without a piece of context that you've always had implied, many times you'll gain a whole new understanding. Or just by the mentee asking questions and prodding and trying to dig deeper. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak asked, why is the Torah likened to a tree? And he answered that just as a small piece of wood, a small match, can ignite a large log, so too a junior scholar can sharpen the senior by asking questions, by prodding, by challenging their assumptions. Oftentimes engineers just do things because that's the way we always did it, but never thought about the why. Why did we always do it that way? Is there a better way? Is my understanding wrong? So just by virtue of helping and teaching others, you will grow yourself as a developer as well, not just the mentee, but the mentor as well. And of course, mentoring is not just for seniors. It's never too early to help others and to teach others. As the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, if you only know Aleph, if you only know the first letter of the alphabet, don't wait until you know the whole Torah. Don't wait until you're a big scholar. Go find someone who doesn't know Aleph and teach them Aleph. I can tell you from my own journey, I went, I studied at a boot camp, and, we would go through our lessons, our labs, and obviously after a few hours, your brain is frazzled already, can't look at another problem in another lab. One of my favorite pastimes to do was to go into our Slack channel and find students who were struggling with some of the labs that I had just completed and help them out. And what I found was that by helping other students with something that I thought I knew already, I passed this lab, I got it, I knew it, but by helping others, it always helped me understand it better. It always solidified it better. I always was able to get a new angle, a new understanding, something I thought I understood and I may have understood a little wrong. By explaining it to someone else, I got it, So no matter where you're holding in your journey, whether you're a senior, whether you're a junior, whether you're just starting out, find someone who doesn't know Aleph and teach them Aleph. But what if you can't find a mentee? What if you can't find someone to teach? What if you're completely at the beginning of your journey, or even later on, there's no one around, there's no one who needs the help right now. So let's go back to one of the directives that we mentioned earlier. We said acquire for yourself a companion. We took a lesson from that for pair programming. Now, one thing about the Hebrew language is that Hebrew has a very wishy-washy relationship with vowels. Vowels aren't always included in the words, so there's room to play around with that and add different vowels. And the rabbis always have a field day with that. They'll learn lessons from one verse. They'll learn multiple lessons depending on which vowel they use. So the Hebrew for acquire for yourself, the word uknei, if you change around the vowels a little bit, it'll be v'kane lecha chaver, and let a pen be your companion. So that can, of course, be a literal pen. Writing notes is really, really helpful. Whenever you learn something new, or if you're stuck on a problem, just writing out the steps, writing out the steps of the problem, writing out your solution can help you. Just like in the way that mentoring a human would force you to break things down into components, writing things down can have the same benefit. But of course, nowadays, with the cost of putting your thoughts out there on the internet being so low, start a blog, or find there's so many blogging platforms out there for developers to share. There's Dev.to or Code Newbies, or there's many communities and blogging platforms. The cost of putting your thoughts out there is so low that there's really no reason not to. And of course, other people may benefit from your blog post, but you might think you have nothing to add, you have nothing to contribute. The main beneficiary will be yourself, will be you. You just by putting your thoughts into words, by breaking it down, by putting it in the form that an audience can consume it, that'll give you the same benefits that we mentioned earlier of mentoring others, even if the others may be separated in time and place by the medium of a blog post. So finally, of course, there's ourselves and our teams, but of course the code that we write is not just for ourselves, and it's not just the tools that our team uses. Most of us are working on code that we put out into the world, and we expect others to use as well. And of course, in that sense, when it comes to that, when we cross that threshold and put our product out into the world, now we already have a responsibility for others, responsibility for how our code will be used. Of course, we all hope that our code will be used, that our product will be used for good, will be used to make the world better, to improve the world. Many of our products are designed to solve a problem in the world. And of course, I think as programmers, we have a very unique strength in this aspect of seeing a problem in the world and trying to solve it. Let's go to a story. The great sage Rabbi Yechiel lived in Israel in the time when it was ruled by the Roman Empire. And the Roman governor at the time, a man by the name of Turnus Rufus, was constantly trying to debate the sages, get them involved, get them, asking them gotcha questions, trying to get them. And one day Turnus Rufus asked Rabbi Yechiel, he said, Rabbi, if your God loves the poor so much, why doesn't he support them? Why are you always preaching charity and helping others and helping the poor? Let God take care of them. So Rabbi Yechiel told him, no, you're wrong. When God shows us someone who's suffering, that is God's way of helping that person. God is telling you, I want you to help that person. By helping that person, by helping the poor, we become better people. We become more giving people, more charitable people, more selfless people. And Turnus Rufus told Rabbi Yechiel, I think you're making a mistake. He said, I don't know, religion. I don't know theology, but I'm in government, and I know that if the king got angry at one of the servants and put the servant in jail and gave a command that nobody should feed that servant. So if someone went behind the king's back and snuck some food into the jail for that poor for that poor servant, the king would be furious. The king would want to punish him. So Rabbi Yechiel told Turnus Rufus, that's a great analogy. You got one detail wrong, though. Imagine if instead of getting angry at his servant, the king got angry at one of his children and put his child in prison and said that no one should feed the child. Now, one of the king's friends who knows the king's temper went behind the king's back and fed the child, kept him alive. Once the king calms down, don't you think the king would be thankful? Don't you think the king would send the person a present? And of course, in the same sense, we're all God's children. And when someone is suffering, it's not because God wants them to suffer. It's not because that's how the world is. It's because when we see someone suffering, it's because we want God wants us. God is showing that to us so that we can help them out. Now, this conversation between Turnus Rufus and Rabbi Kiva survives well into our day and age. It's been documented. It's some of you might be familiar with it as the just world fallacy. It's a common logical fallacy that we all suffer from to some extent or another, where when we see someone who's down on their luck and we're just tempted to assume that that person deserves it. That person did say, you see someone homeless and you think, oh, if only they'd get a job. Or, you see someone who's suffering health situations like, oh, what did they eat? What did they, did they watch themselves? Did they, maybe they should try meditating, or did they try losing weight? Or whatever it is, whenever we see someone who's down their luck, we have a need to feel that the world is just. And therefore, if someone is having a hard time, it's probably because they did something to deserve that. And of course, like I said, we all, this is something that we all have to struggle with, no matter your politics, no matter your religious background, no matter who you are, really. And what Rabbi Kiva was telling us that, no, this worldview is wrong. When we see suffering, when we see someone who's down on their luck, it's not because that's the way the world is. When we see someone suffering, that's because it is our, that is what we have to fix. That is our job to fix that. And as programmers, I think we're especially equipped to deal with that. We're all familiar with error messages. Error messages are bread and butter. And, I remember going back to my earlier days in boot camp. I remember one of the biggest aha moments I had. One of our instructors was live coding a lesson, live coding a feature. And of course, nothing works the first time. And, you put some code on the screen. He ran the file and ran into an error message. And my thought was like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing for them. It just, their code just blew up. It just made a mistake. But before I had a chance to even think that, completely unironically, oh, great, we got an error message. Let's see what it says. And I started working through that error message. And of course, the more and more, as we went further and further in the curriculum, the more that kept happening and the more that attitude was drilled into us, that error messages are your friend. Error messages are good. Error messages show us what needs to be fixed. As Steve Klabnik told a friend of mine, Avi Flambaum, he said, in programming, you're spending the majority of your time with things being broken. I mean, if they'd be fixed, if everything worked, you'd be done programming. No one hires programmers to babysit working apps. If everything is working, you're not needed. You're getting a paycheck from fixing broken things. When things are broken, that is your job. That is what you do. Especially those of us who practice test-driven development, we know that feeling of going from one error to another error, fixing one error after the other. Just in the same sense that New York drivers don't drive somewhere; they just cut everyone off until they get there. Programmers don't really program an app. We just fix errors until we got a working product. And and of course, we here in the Rails community, the Ruby community, understand the importance of that even more. With our focus on being nice, and it's not just a slogan. Of course, everyone experienced firsthand how the Ruby community is so welcoming, and so really, the language itself is nice to us. So, in fact, just digging through the Rails repository, here's for example, a pull request by my friend Ben Greenberg to make the language in the code more inclusive. This isn't even something that an end user will see. This is just something that the maintainers on Rails code will see. Or this issue raised by my friend Ariel Kaplan. Both of my friends Ben and Ariel will be giving talks at this RailsConf as well. You should watch them too. But to make the Rails, the famous Rails landing page, to make it more inclusive, to make it look more like the people who use it. The Ruby community, the Rails community, understands this idea that this idea of being inclusive, of being nice, of using our code to make the world better, to make other people feel better, to make the world a better place for all of us. But of course, it's not always so easy, and it's a lot easier to say, "Not my problem." You see, there's problems in the world. The world is big. There's a lot of problems in the world. It's a lot easier to say, "Not my house, not my fire." Really, you can't expect me to care. And that's tempting, of course. So the sage Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said a story, a parable. So there was one time a group of people who were traveling on a ship. They were traveling the ocean, and one day one of them got bored, took a drill, and started drilling a hole under a seat. And obviously all the other passengers were horrified. Water started pouring in all over the place. And like, "What are you doing? You're gonna bring us all down." And he told them, what are you talking about? What do you care? I'm drilling. This is my own cabin. What do you care what I'm doing here? You mind your own business. You enjoy your boat ride. I'm drilling under my seat. Why do you have to? Why do you care? But of course, we all know the fallacy of that argument, because if we're on a boat, if there's a hole under your seat, I'm going down as well. So in the same way, like we said, none of us is an island. None of us is on their own boat either. If you can't just say, I'm doing fine, my part of the world is okay, my part of the world is nice, so I don't have to worry about the rest of the world. Especially nowadays, the importance of the idea of the world as a small village where the actions of one affect all, and the actions of all affect each and every one of us. So saying "not my problem" is not always an option, and it's almost never an option. But what should we do? There are a lot of problems. It really is impossible for each one of us to fix all the world's problems. What can we do about that? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that cognitive load of knowing that there's so many problems that we're not going to be able to fix? And the sage Rabbi Tarfon said it such. He said, "It is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. Some things are bigger than you and me. Some things are bigger than any one individual person. Think of all the major projects that the world has put together, massive construction projects, big dams, huge skyscrapers, a space station orbiting Earth, putting a man on the moon, a web framework. What all these things have in common is that these are the culmination of the work of thousands of people, of construction workers, engineers, architects, managers, scientists, astronauts, programmers, engineers, developers. And all these projects are so much bigger than each individual worker who worked on them. That day laborer who was pouring concrete on the Hoover Dam, it was just one person. The dam was massive. It's so much bigger than each individual person who worked on it. Yet at the same time, the project could not have been done without each and every one of them. In the same way, in a similar sense, fixing all the world's problems is, of course, a much bigger problem than each and every one of us, is a much bigger problem than each individual one. But at the same time, we can all be proud of it and make the world a better place. Thanks for coming to my talk. I really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to me. I will be on the Discord channel all during the whole conference, or you can reach out to me at any of my other ways to getting. If you enjoyed this talk and you enjoyed the intersection between Torah and technology, you can feel free to subscribe to my newsletter, Torah and Tech, which is at torahandtech.dev. And thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much.